Okay, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
So, nice to see you as always. Guess what I did yesterday?
Brush your teeth.
Hell yeah, I mean, actually, I do, except
I
for some
knew
things.
it. Uh,
Except for times in the Army, I generally
Next
make
subject.
that a habit every day. Yes. So thanks for that accurate guess. No, I listened to our first show on conversation on immigration. I
Oh,
listened to
wow.
the whole thing. I was doing it while I was driving, so I didn't take notes or whatever. But it was an interesting conversation. And guess how long ago it was?
I have no idea.
Almost 3 years ago, May 28th of 2021 was the last time we discussed immigration, which makes me feel like a heel. Because there's lots of stuff to talk about in immigration, right?
Yeah. Well, I just noticed that it's been 10 years since the leadership uh, thing at AEI that brought us together.
Oh, a decade ago? God, that just
Yeah.
means we're getting old.
Yeah. 10 years.
Yeah, they said they wanted mid-career people to go to this leadership thing, where you have lots of time to still influence society. Well, so much for that. They just got an old guy with this one here. Well, that's nice. 10 years ago, and what a pleasure to make your acquaintance and do these conversations. Um, so we don't. My intent today is not to repeat what we talked about almost 3 years ago, May 28th. And since you didn't listen to it today, let me just I from memory of what I was listening to while I drove yesterday. I wrote down a couple of the things we talked about. We talked about families, and we talked about perpetual war, the state of humanity. There was just basically one warring family against another, and there really wasn't any peace. We talked about the early colonies and why they came here and where they came from. We talked about a prohibition on African immigration in relationship to slavery. And so, kind of the commonly accepted guess of why we prohibited it, and then your more interesting, which was totally new to me, and it's still kind of alien to me, of why the what are they called? People that were against slavery didn't wanted a prohibition. We talked about Asian prejudice and racism. I talked about some of that in Eastern Europe too, and then we talked about the economies or the economics of migration and why people move and how that affects societies. And you hinted on something that I don't think you mean, but you did say it in a way that implies that you're in favor of open borders, and I don't think that's exactly accurate, but there's some semblances of truth to that. Do you remember anything else we may have talked about? It was a long, hearty conversation, but just to give you an idea, we talked comprehensively about immigration.
Well, it's funny because listening to you summarize it, I think I've gotten dumber over the because I was like, wow, that would be those would be this like that sounds like a conversation with a smart person, but I don't
It was really
I
meaty, and there's no way I would have asked some of those questions without doing 15 minutes or an hour of research ahead of time to ask you some questions. So I prepared for it, and you answered thoughtfully. It was a nice show.
well, I'd be interesting. It would be interesting to go back and see what I said about open borders, which is why, I was kind of hoping Bart would be here and glad to have this conversation with you, but there are a handful of issues that I feel like um, need a nationwide reappraisal of values, and in order to say what are we doing here, and I think it's this. I think it's that way with mental health issues and criminal justice, immigration, taxation, is another one where I feel like I'm actually pretty open to being persuaded. I just need somebody to tell me how this all fits together logically, because
Hmm.
I, there's an old I'm sure Jake, this is the first time I need you, right? There's this old I think it was Milton Friedman quote where he says you can have open borders or you can have a social services, but you can't have
Social
both.
safety net is what you
Yeah,
said.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I've really thought about that because we've kind of vacillated back and forth and never really decided what we want. So I mean, who do we, this is the question I would ask like almost every American citizen. I feel like walking around with a clipboard. How many people do you want to let in? And what's that based on? And then how would you prioritize who you let in? You know, and then I would uh and then I would say, okay, how close is that to what we're already doing? You know, like, and this is why I wish, this is, we wish we had better politicians. We wish we had a better media. We wish we had a better elite educational institutions. But throwing some brain power behind this, because I feel like all of the entities that are around to try to come up with a solution never really come up with a coherent solution.
Well, now
Um,
that may be accurate, and I'm surprised I don't know the answer to this, but don't you think AEI or Heritage or what's the big one on the left? One of those big think tanks in DC, I'm sure, has come up with white paper after book on this.
yeah, but what I see is just like piecemeal, and it is often not what I would consider to be kind of ground up from a political standpoint, because it almost has to work hand in hand with political leadership of somebody who says, you can imagine somebody with the credibility of, I don't know, let's say I think George W. Bush probably had the credibility to do this, but the media and intellectual environment and educational environment was probably too far gone. But like, if, for instance, a George Bush or a Reagan or a Gerald Ford, had come up with some sort of like, all right, this is what the process is going to be to find out what the American people really want in terms of immigration, and have an honest conversation with congressmen who are having honest conversations with their constituents, and then just answering this question of like, who would you let in, how much would it be, and then accurately reporting, we're doing what the American people actually want and have thought about. But you got to lead people through this process.
Okay,
And
so
there,
we're of like mind. When I was thinking about the questions I wanted to ask you today, I would have phrased it all differently, but I appreciate your construct that you're trying to guide us in. Um, I really do. But let me try a question or two and then go back to your
yeah,
construct. Um, our congresswoman, and I'd almost rather not name because I don't think it does great justice to our society to always point out to the extreme by their
yeah,
name. That's actually what they want, and then they get more coverage, and then they can raise money off it. It seems like we get what we don't want in America because we focus on what we're mad about. I don't get it. The media attention cycle, the money thing. I don't get it. So I'd rather not name her by name. But she says we got to build a moat with alligators and then put spikes. And so, and so all the, so everybody's talking about alligators. And to me, I just think, oh, this is so silly. What a silly season we're in, where we concentrate on that rather than substance.
mhm,
But alligators sells. It's easy. A lot of people can, if you're against immigration and you don't like seeing Mexicans or Central America, South Americans, I'm not sure who they are, but on roofs in Colorado, and you don't like seeing them when you look in the kitchen in of whatever restaurant you're in, and you don't like seeing them out in the oil fields and the construction industry. They're all over the place. I'm pretty well traveled in Colorado. And Mexicans or someone of Hispanic descent is all over the place. And they're not speaking English. Now, maybe they speak English. They are fluent Spanish speakers all over the place. I hear it every day. And so, are we mad at them? Are we angry at them? We want alligators and spiky things, apparently, according to our congresswoman, but I'm not sure we mean that. So, to your point of this construct, how many people do we need and how many do we want? Um, I, I, I go to this basic construct first and see if you agree with me on this. It is better to be wanted than not. So, if people want to come to America, can we all at least agree that that's a good thing? I mean,
It's,
that's like the premise. Like, hey, cool, we have something here, whether it's opportunity or freedom or lots of nuances. We want, I guess, there's barbed wire on top of some fences, and you want that barbed wire to be able to be, you want it to be keeping somebody out, not keeping us in, right?
yeah. Well, here's where Jake, you can prove yourself to be a better researcher than I was. But I remember reading in a book somewhere, and I read it once, and I've never been able to track down the original source for it, so I can't use it in any scholarship. But somewhere I read that Ronald Reagan said he had some sort of a fences test where he said lower the fences and see which way people run, and that'll tell you, which society is better. But I've never actually been able to track down. I've been able to track down secondary uses of the quote, but I've never been able to track down the primary source behind the quote. So I've never been able to use it, but it's a great concept. If you want to know if your society is good or not, lower the fences and see which way people run.
And we do have expats around the world, millions of them, I think. Americans that decide they'd rather move and retire to some other country. Good for them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they're anti-patriotic. That just means they really like France or Spain or something. I've got several friends who've done it myself. So that's one version of going, hey, I like that other place better.
But I would say, like, think about that, America. I don't know. I think there's a lesson to be learned from expats. Like, think long and hard, America, about why we have expats.
I mean, there truly are. I haven't looked this up, but there truly are millions of them, right?
Right. That's my
Yeah.
point. Like, say,
But for the
the
most part,
Reagan fences test works both ways.
but for the most part, people want to come to America rather than leave America, right?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah. Okay. So when we put me in the category, by the way, of wanting a more secure border versus an open border, why? I'm not even positive. It's just some kind of ancestral notion that you should know what your property is or you should feel safe. And whether
But,
it's a
John, let me stop you right there. Like, what does this have to do with immigration? You know what I mean? I have no idea why these two issues are, I mean, I get it, but they both have the word border in them. But like, we have this idea, this notion somehow that these two issues are intertwined. Like, what does one thing have to do with the other? Like,
and do you mean that it's practically like a matter of engineering that it's basically impossible to have a secure wall or fence or border, or do you mean it in a notion of, well, shouldn't we at least decide what that wall is for first?
no, no,
Or
no, that's not it at all. What I'm saying is, like, when we talk about immigration, we're talking about a legal process where one person who lives in another country moves to the United States of America legally. That's immigration. What happens at the border is about controlling illegal immigration. Like,
okay.
those two things are like separate issues. One
Well,
of them
but there is no conversation on legal immigration. You basically hear every once in a while, "Hey, we're not racist, or we're not against migration, we're not against immigration, we're against illegal." And so therefore build a wall. And until we have that conversation, it's not fair to have any other conversation because we have no idea what's going on. I mean, that's
I'm
basically the
saying it's
Republican.
it's intellectually well, I don't want to go that far. All right. Um I don't think we need, I think we need to have both conversations. And I don't appreciate them always being linked together
I'm
when
hearing you.
they don't necessarily have to be linked together. We can set aside and have a conversation about how do we want to process the people who want to come to this country, right? But at the same time, that is, it's not.
When's the last time you've heard a congressman or a meet the press kind of person uh, talk about legal immigration and the amount coming in of H-1B and H-1A, and here we really need some higher standards for and more. I mean, occasionally it's mentioned, but there's no debate. There's no like cultural debate in America about how many more engineers we need to get to the moon again, or
Yeah.
we don't talk about that, do we?
No.
It's easier to talk about the wall.
Yeah. And people also like act like what we're trying to build in the United States is like I don't know, a factory or something. I just disagree with let's take this back to like first principles. I think about Peter Schramm and his essay, Born American in the Wrong Place. And I start from the premise that and I know this is the kind of conversation I'd like to have with people, I start with the premise that what that the people I want in the United States are people who were born Americans but in the wrong place.
Mm.
And I want to let all of them in. Like but I don't know how many of them there are. I don't know how we could screen for that. I don't, and
Right.
and I would need to sit down with other people and start moving from there. But that's my first principle on immigration. And wow, Jake, you've just made my life so much better.
You found the original
Well, he found something, but
quote?
not the original quote. But yeah, he did find a Reagan quote about a fence, um, but there's something better than that. Anyway, but so my first principles are, you know, who are these people in the world who really believe in the principles of the Declaration of Independence, and that's the life that they want to lead, that they have decided or they understand that protecting the rights of others is central to their own success. And let's let all of them in and then see who's left over, And I guess because I don't necessarily prioritize things like I prioritize that over things like who has a skill in a job that no American worker can do. I just, that whole process is bizarre to me, and it's so.
But let me interrupt you, Professor. It's not bizarre. You're surrounded by agriculture, I think. I mean, if you're a farmer, you got to have somebody out in the field. Machines just can't do it all, at least not yet.
They're
Um,
getting
and they're getting there. I know, but there are still millions of agricultural farm workers that are out there picking stuff. Right?
there. Yeah, but I mean, that system is, at least in California, pretty tightly regulated. It's not.
Okay.
It's
All
not
right.
what
Well, let me switch gears.
you could figure.
There are millions of people who know how to work a nail gun and are up on a roof because it's scarier than hell, and they're pounding asphalt shingles into a roof using a nail gun. There's millions of those, right? And
Yeah.
there's very few Americans doing that. They're mostly, at least in Colorado, they're Mexicans or somewhere from South America or Central America.
Yeah, I just don't think that a lot of those people are illegal anymore. I mean,
Fascinating.
I,
That see, but we don't know. We don't know how many people are illegal, do we?
yeah, I mean, we have an estimate
Well,
of
but it's a pure estimate. It's like 10 to 11 million, and those are just the people that it's a pure estimate. It's a total guess, isn't it?
yes and no, because I mean, this is again why the sort of like border stuff ends up being so bizarre, is that the vast majority of people just overstay their visas.
We didn't
So,
talk a lot about that last time.
so
Um, I think
I
it's
mean,
about even, though. I don't know if it's a vast majority. I think it's about even, half and half.
yeah, but it's not that hard to go back and forth between Mexico and the United States. The only reason to avoid the going in a car on a freeway
Right.
is because then it's then you're sort of in the system or tracked or something. But like there are 8-lane superhighways that go back and forth between Mexico and the United States at border crossings. I mean, this is another thing. Jake could probably look this up. Like, how many people actually cross the U.S. Mexico border every day? And
Yeah, and then a second corollary that's interesting too is how many trucks go back
yeah,
and forth every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's
So
voluminous.
so this
Well,
idea
so
that somehow putting alligators in the river, is okay. you know, um, it's bizarre. It's theater.
uh, okay, let's take one more bizarre theater then. But boy, it resonates. In fact, Professor, I have a little bit of leaning towards this as well. No, I don't. But it's easy to say we're going to have the largest mass deportation in the history of the United States. We're going to round them all up and send them all back to where they came from. That somebody fairly influential said that in the last week. Did you hear that?
Um, that they want to round up everybody who's here
Yeah,
illegally.
yeah, millions. We're going to have the largest mass deportation in the history of the United States if I'm elected president. Did you hear that?
I have heard that, but I remember there was an old George Will column from probably 20 years ago where, some politician back then promised, we're going to round up all the illegal immigrants. And he pointed out that there aren't enough buses in the world. There aren't enough planes. There aren't enough trucks. Like the capacity of the entire transit capacity of the United States would not accommodate this if you did it every day. If you crippled the economy of the United States and dedicated our entire government to doing nothing but deporting people, you couldn't do it.
Could that be a worthwhile column to read? Because it seems like I don't know. Maybe
I mean,
this
you're
is
talking about 22
well,
million people. What's the capacity of a single bus? And then how many buses
right.
exist? You know, like and how many, I mean,
But how many people? Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get us off track. That's an interesting point.
no,
But Jake, how many people fly every day in America? How many people are literally on a plane every day in America? Anyway, so Professor, do we have a system or not? Last 3 years ago, you said, "Hey, why are we talking about? I'm not even sure it's a system." Um,
well, it's such a crazy patchwork, is what it is. I mean, I love Cato used to put out this graphic that had want to become a US citizen? It's easy. Follow this path. And it showed just how insanely complicated the path was to
right,
becoming a US citizen. It is insanely complicated. I mean, especially if you're trying to follow the rules. My sister just
right,
got married to somebody from another country, and it took him years
right.
just to get him
And it shouldn't take somebody
here.
years. Well, but by deciding not to decide is also to decide, which is one of my favorite quotes. And it's in a couple different languages, a couple attributed to a couple different people, I think, if my memory is right. Um, but we allow you must admit in the last 4 months there's been a massive surge that is overwhelming the border. Yes or no?
Seems like, yeah, I think Jake said 12,000 per day or something.
Yeah, and so we got to do something different, don't we?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's overwhelming the system. And
And
there
so
is
we
a
got to do
bill. Uh,
right.
looks like it's going to pass, and it will hopefully
Well,
make.
wait, it doesn't look it's not gonna pass. The Speaker of the House has said it's 0. No, we're not gonna consider it. That's 0 chance of passing.
I think Mitch McConnell is good at counting votes
In the House?
everywhere.
Good point. So you actually do think an immigration bill a major substantive immigration bill is gonna pass this year?
Mitch McConnell is sometimes wrong and sometimes unsuccessful, but it's sort of like, oh, I always bet on Mitch McConnell.
Fascinating. That's a really interesting point. But does it bother you? You brought up lots of evidence last time we spoke on this subject. And so, if anyone's really interested in this topic, they should see our frustration about where we currently are today. And today's conversation is kind of just a really, we should be doing something totally different conversation. Great. Last conversation had all sorts of history on the topic, which was really worthwhile to have that as a basis to kind of think through on what we want to answer your questions today. I'm still thinking that to allow these millions of recent comers to the United States, which I feel I'm not angry at them, by the way. I feel, hey, we're still liked. People want to be with us. Neat, you know. So I'm not the angry branch of the former Republican Party who wants to put up spikes and alligators. And I don't even want to prohibit them. I want to make it all legal. I want to figure out some legal way where we can use guest workers temporarily. You spoke a lot about that. You didn't like guest workers. You want people to believe in the American dream and come here and be citizens. Why do guest worker stuff? And that's a really interesting point. I think we as Americans should think about that. I assume you still stand by those statements today.
Yeah, and I say this with, I have a lot of friends who are green card holders.
Mhm.
I kind of permanent resident, but not a citizen. I, so I like the idea of everybody being a citizen.
Do you,
Um,
when I listened to it yesterday, it kind of made me think of the difference between a homeowner and a renter. There's nothing wrong with renters. I mean, wherever you are in life, and there's nothing wrong with renters, but it is different than putting your feet down and saying, "I'm going to stay here for a while, make a difference to the house and my neighborhood." Is that
yeah,
right? Is that a good analogy?
yeah, I think so.
Okay, nothing wrong with it. It's just, yeah, it's not as good as a home ownership mostly.
Well, it's just, there's nothing wrong with people who are passing through or at a various stage in life, but like, I think that generally speaking, it's better. And I say this, the other thing is it's very difficult for me, um, because I have so many personal experiences with people who have personal experiences with the immigration system. I mean, on
Right.
a daily
You mean
basis.
dreamers or
I just mean you know, their IT, every day when I look in my classroom, um, I don't see, uh, you know, none of my students are Norwegian. Like I don't, I've spent my entire life in a thoroughly integrated um, environment. And to me, it's weird when I go other places and
but you mean integrated with Latinos?
not necessarily, but also Filipino and Armenian and
Okay, all
like,
right.
it's I can't even, yet I have to look at my high school yearbook, but like I've never been in an environment that wasn't like that. And then in particular, the big immigration surges of the 80s and 90s were mostly Mexican American, but also there's also this thing because of Vietnam where we've always had a lot of Laotian and Southeast Asian immigrants too. Plus,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. It's always been a mix. But when when you're trying to help a student, um, and they come to you in your office, and I mean, not every week, but every couple weeks, you're dealing with somebody, and you start to hear their individual stories, and you realize like this is somebody who's caught up in something they're trying to deal with, and this kid's 19. Whatever this person is caught up in, like, I mean, we're not talking about murderers here. We're talking about people who are like, well, uh, I didn't find out that I wasn't a citizen, but my two sisters, my older one and my younger one, were both born in the United States, and it's just I wasn't. And yeah, I guess technically that person would have been considered a dreamer or whatever. And in many cases, it's like, yeah, my mom missed out on the amnesty. Why? She didn't trust the government. And you're like, oh my God, she's lived through two amnesties, or they were like, we think we're going to go back to Mexico anyway. And you realize like, oh, his parents are affecting their kids' lives. And it's hard not to sympathize with people who are encountering this system that makes almost no sense if you are the individual who is encountering it.
Right.
I've never had, I mean, even somebody, my younger sister she is the smart one in the family, like I, between, I always say I'm like the failure in my family compared to my two sisters. And
Mhm.
my little sister is, in terms of raw brain power, is like as smart as they come. And there is no intellectual task she cannot perform. And watching her try to navigate the immigration system, she did it, but it takes the smartest person you know to do it. Like, it's insane. And that's like, it shouldn't be.
And this is for her husband or future
Yeah, for
husband, or
her husband. Yeah, and
yeah.
it just shouldn't be. It shouldn't require the smartest person you know to navigate something in order to follow the law. And this is where we get, this is a concept we've talked about many times, where like complexity is a subsidy, you know, and
Right.
and it's an inequality, you know. Um,
Right.
so
Well, let me,
and
gosh,
not
there's
to
so
be
much,
frustrated. Yeah.
as always, there's so much, we could go in so many different directions. But one of those principles that you're asking for under this lack of a system, I guess we have, or very complex system, shouldn't we at least have some rules and then follow those rules? Is that okay to expect in a
Yeah. It's,
society?
it's the foundation of
Okay.
civil society, rule of
Okay.
law.
Okay, so we agree that let's figure out what those rules are, and if they're so complex they don't make sense, then let's dumb them down or simplify them for compliance effect at least, or for morality.
I'm
But
just saying, if we were to start over, wipe the
right,
slate clean, reprioritize, figure out what our priorities were, and create that, create a law from a blank slate, what would that look like? Because right now, here's the, I mean, I just, if you really want to get like politicized, this morning I watched some video of a cop getting beaten up in New York, and it was a criminal gang. And when they ran the people, they were like people who had committed crimes in um, Florida, California, and New York, right? These are criminal gangs, and it's not a lot of people, and it's, we want to be careful to say, oh, it's, not the vast majority, but like there has to be some way to prevent them from coming to the United States, prosecute them for crimes when they get here in every state, and get them out and keep them out. That's not an unreasonable standard for America. you
okay.
know,
Well, so
uh,
we have simplified it though. We are the rule of law. We do need some kind of barricade or barrier. So they have to go through those ports of entry. Going back to Reagan, we have to go through the if there must be a wall, make the doors big and broad, and yeah, yeah. So right, but we need to do something on the border to make it more secure. We agree with that. If we're drawing a clean slate, or I mean, in today's current emergency,
yeah,
and
I'm the thing is so politicized. I want to say, like, I want it to be actually secure, not pretend secure.
yeah, well, that's a valid point. Yeah, not the gamesmanship playing. Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. But and I'm not sure how you make it secure because just you see all the YouTube videos of different ways to climb walls,
Well,
and if
that's
you're
the thing.
asking that,
It's like, really, you can't. And so dealing with that reality means that we need some sort
you
of,
can't secure it. You mean
yeah. And so, like, but when, I mean, I remember dealing with this with our actually local sheriff who's now running for Congress. And one of the things that this is how weird politics is. Um, he's being criticized for being soft on, criminals, but what he actually did was he was confronted. He explained this to me once, and I had the DA explain it to me. Essentially, there is no way to follow the law because the law is contradictory. And the federal law contradicts itself and state law contradicts itself. So,
in specific instances or in all the
yeah, I
time?
mean, I guess you'd have to have them on because when they explained it, I was like, wow, this is complicated, but
Okay.
the way they explained it, when you're trying to actually enforce the law, you have to break federal law and state law in order to follow federal and state law when it comes to dealing with illegal immigrants who are caught up in the legal system. They've committed a criminal offense. There is no way. So you got to pick. And essentially, they both said to varying degrees that they just tried to prioritize people who had committed really bad
Dangerous, violent.
offenses,
Right.
uh, and that what was difficult is that in doing so, the state of California would sometimes force them to release those people, which was frustrating to both of them because they thought they were both already doing the humane thing, which is if somebody is a nonviolent criminal, but they've committed a minor criminal offense or something like that, they're the kind of people who have put down roots and they will show up for a court date or whatever. The Mexican mafia isn't going to send them a plane ticket and bring them home. And they always felt frustrated because, at least in California, they would sometimes be forced to release the really dangerous criminal, the murderer, the guy who had, probably, had a string of bodies dropped off in orange orchards for in a 90-mile radius, but I'm sure if we were to have people like that on the show, they could explain just how absurd the enforcement is for somebody who's trying to both follow the law and do the right thing. You almost can't.
Man, Professor, I don't know how to even proceed on this because
Sorry.
all of our incentives are not to have deep counterpoint conversations and learning and exchange of ideas and compromise. Our entire system has gone in the exact opposite direction over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all performative now. And so it's just easier to say stuff as long as it's interesting and edgy, or it's better to create a meme over it, especially if it's provocative or titillating.
Oh, I mean, it's funny now because when I have had long conversations with public officials, you'll see when they run for office that they just say the most absurd things, like you're just like, oh, wow, they all right, well, this is how you're presenting yourself on on social media or in your fundraising emails, even the good ones.
Well, we have like 15 minutes left. Stephen, you're welcome to join us, but you'll have to listen to the first hour. So, Professor, we can't start from scratch. It would be nice to start from scratch. I guess it'd be nice to have I mean, you're not asking for a constitutional convention regarding immigration. That would even be harder. But you are asking us to think deep thoughts and guiding principles and where we stand, and then base our policies based off that. I'm trying to push you to agree or disagree on some contemporary issues, and if people want the history, they can go to our last conversation on it. But
Okay.
on work, it doesn't make sense to me. So you make this argument, even if it's just tell me it doesn't make sense to, if the border's being overrun by hundreds, by 10,000 a day or whatever, and then we're going to allow all those people the last 3 months or 6 months or a year or 10 years, I don't know, we're going to allow them to be able to work legally. What? That doesn't make sense to me. It's the marketing angle of just deport them all. The biggest deep mass deportation in the history of the United States is going to happen under my administration. I think most Americans, maybe it's only 50% plus one, but I think 60% of Americans probably would agree with that rather than give everybody the ability to stay here and work. I'm not even sure I understand the current political dynamics. I don't even know how to get to those base values you're urging us all to get to, because it seems like it's such a mess that I don't know how to proceed. And that seems odd for a guy who's been working on this for these types of
Well,
issues.
look, there are a lot of people who are citizens whom I might want to deport. I don't know.
Yeah, no kidding. I have a
Well, I
list.
just think that like one of the things that I believe so strongly in the idea of the United States as an ideological nation state that I want I mean, I don't mean this seriously, so don't take me
Oh, but you
literally.
mean if people believe in peace, you want them here?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And if somebody is like, I hate America, I hate everything about this country, I don't believe in freedom, you know, I'm kind of, there is a part of me that thinks just like, can we kick this person out? You know, like, can we invite like somebody from who's on the other side of this wall who believes in our founding ideals, let them in and replace this guy who hates our founding ideals. Kick
So
him
you
out.
are kind of going back to your open border approach. I mean,
Oh,
if
not open borders.
I don't know.
And again, I'm just, you know, I don't actually literally mean that, but there is something in the
Well,
back of my head that, what's that?
and I back to your earlier point on the wall itself. I want a more effective demarcation of whether you're on this property or that property. I want there to be some following of the law. But I'm also painfully aware that you just can't build a wall thick enough, tall enough, deep enough, strong enough that unless you're willing to kill the person when they're digging, climbing, traversing, breaking, squeezing, all the things you do to breach a piece of material. Unless you're willing to kill them, you really can't build a structure. And even then, if you're willing to kill them, I mean, that's a heck of a lot of manpower to be killing a bunch of innocent people, or not innocent, but young people or desperate people or desiring people. And we're not ready to do that as a society. I mean, so it's
But
kind of a false.
let me say one little story that demonstrates how little people understand what the actual situation is at the border. My best friend and his wife and two members of her family were going to a wedding in San Diego, and they were changing into their tuxedos, and they missed the off ramp, the last off ramp, and ended up going into Mexico. Now, because of that, it meant that none of them had IDs, and there was only one American citizen in that car. And so when they got to the first border, they flipped a U, came back, and they were, everybody in the car was like trying to come up with what story do we tell? And my best friend was like, we're not going to tell any story. We're just going to tell them the truth. So they get up and to the border, and he goes, we missed the last border crossing and we don't have any ID. Border patrol just wave them through. Like,
Just wave them through.
Yeah. Like, and that kind of stuff happens thousands of times every day.
Every day.
Every day.
Well, you're saying all this is a fake argument. All this is a false choice between the political parties in DC. It's because it's not reality.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with what's going on. I mean, ask anybody who lives near any of these border crossings. Like, you have no idea the scale of how many human beings are going back and forth every day in every possible, who just walk.
Right.
Like you can just walk.
Didn't you make the point? Well, you made all sorts of points
There are
last
people who
time.
commute every day to work, back and forth.
Right. Oh, yeah, lots of people.
Lots of people work in the United States and live in Mexico, and they commute back and forth through the border every single day. And
yeah. I mean, that's tens of thousands of people. Yeah.
Just the way we talk about it is so divorced from reality.
Okay, so temporarily, let me say this, try this practical approach then. You believe, and you probably haven't read it. I mean, well, I'm sure you haven't read it, but even the main principles, I'm not sure you're aware of because I'm not positive I have. You probably read an newspaper article or two, but on this immigration compromise, well, we haven't read it because it hasn't been released. So Yeah,
Totally
but
forget.
yeah, but you're saying Mitch McConnell's a good vote counter, so that's really fascinating to think through in that way. That he's going to be able to get it through the House, which is fascinating. That's a good thing because it kind of gets the pressure off for now, and we can argue about other things. Or it, I mean,
Well, I just think it's probably better. I mean, again, I haven't read it, but it's probably better than what it replaces. It's probably a step towards some recognition of reality. And
but if you're an ultra conservative, I'm not. You, in some ways, are. I don't even know what ultra means, but it, it gives the president authorization to shut down the border if it's over 5,000 a day or something. Well, but you're just pointing out that, well, that whole thing is stupid. I mean, what do you mean shut down the border? But you're gonna not have all these people come to work, or we don't want our TV sets or parts for our cars? What do you mean we shut down the border? That's not going to happen. So it's kind of a fake performative bill,
yeah, and if
probably.
there were truly some sort of national security issue, the president probably already has that authority,
Probably
you know?
could do that anyway. But you're
Yeah.
talking about terrorists from around the world that could potentially be coming through the border.
Well, and no, not necessarily. I mean, the crazy thing is, here's another thing Jake can look up. Look up the
He's
area
going to have
of the
to any
United
minute.
States. Oh, is he still here?
He
Look
might
up
still be.
the area of the United States where the Border Patrol has authority. And you see that it incorporates an awful lot of the areas where the United States, where all the people live in the United States of America. There's I mean, it's essentially, I forget how many miles in all the way around, where the Border Patrol has some
Yeah.
really broad authority. And it incorporates, like, for instance, uh, in California, something like 80 or 90% of the people in California live in an area where the Border Patrol already has extremely broad authority.
I'm glad you brought that up. We should at least talk for a minute about what's going on between Abbott and the U.S. Supreme Court and the
Oh, yeah.
president. What isn't that fairly clear? I know the Republicans are going right to the Constitution, saying they have a right to defense, and the Supreme Court's wrong, and we're not going to obey that. To me, that seems all pretty scary stuff. To me, it seems pretty cut and dry. Now, on the other hand, it was a 5-4 U.S. Supreme Court decision. So, can you give some perspective on that? I assume you haven't read the case, but
Yeah, I guess I'd say it's cut and dry, but not it wasn't a Supreme Court decision, first of all. It's just a support, it's just a decision on whether to hear the case on an emergency basis. So, and there are Supreme Court justices who just vote no because they know that a lot of these they don't want to get pulled into the game of political stunts.
right.
And so I don't want to overinterpret that 5-4 decision. But at the same time, I would say it's pretty clear how this is going to end up, and it's going to end up that the federal um, the federal legal system is supreme. Um,
You don't buy any of these conservative arguments that it's right there in the Constitution, the ability of the state to defend themselves against an invasion. It's right there in the Constitution.
I don't buy the argument that that's a conservative position. That that is it that language is meant for essentially what we would call border incursions of the kind that uh, you know tribe attacks and then retreats across to Mexico. you know
Until the U.S. government can get there.
right, yeah, it means like self-defense in an emergency.
Yeah, and
um
that's my interpretation. I think it's wrong too. So I'm interested. I'm glad to know that we agree on that. I guess. Jake is already leaving, as you've seen.
yeah.
I know you've got to head off to a meeting, Professor. Stephen, I think this is your first conversation you've ever joined us, and unfortunately, for whatever reason, you joined us 45 minutes late. So it's a little unfair to see if you have a question or a comment regarding immigration policy in the U.S. with our esteemed professor. But I'd hate to just hang up when you did dial in to make a
Yeah.
question or a comment. So this is your chance to do so if you have one. If you do, take yourself off mic, or otherwise you can go, I'm okay, and you don't have to take yourself off mic. What's your preference? You're okay? Yeah, I can't. Yeah, you're okay. Okay. So, Professor, if you're so inclined, I know you don't want to hear your own voice. I get it. But at some time when you're bored, and maybe when you're on a bike ride, you could wire up the Spotify and download that on immigration. I
Yeah.
think it's a really worthy conversation. It's kind of the conversation that we wish Congress people were having with each other,
Yeah.
that we had 3 years ago.
Well, there are
Um,
Congress people who do it. You've heard me praise Congressman Valadao before. He has conversations. He wants to do the right thing. He thinks about this stuff long term, and he's a statesman in that regard. So there are people. I don't know Jim Costa very well, but I wish I did. But who knows what their voices are? Costa is a Democrat.
okay.
Valadao is a Republican. I kind of wonder what it would be like if we locked them in a room with me for 2 weeks, and
What you could draft.
yeah, what we would drag out of them.
Well, this sounds odd for me. I don't know if it's odd for me. Well, not surprising to you, but it would be for some people that don't know me well. I believe that it is immoral to allow these young men and women did not break any law because they were children, and our whole basis of jurisprudence doesn't allow for children to break the law. So if you're a 6-month-old or a 6-year-old, and I don't know, there's some age at 16 or something, but there's some age that
Mhm.
you can't start to break the law. But if you were brought here illegally, but you were a kid, but you've grown up in America and this is the language you speak, and the law changed, Obama, to allow for DACA, and it hasn't been overruled. Um, for them to live in this limbo status where they can be deported at any time with a change of a president,
Mhm.
I I just think that's immoral, and I think we've got to fix that kind of thing. Now, does that mean I'm just opened up anybody that sneaks across them and their extended families forever or all American citizen? No, there's got to be some kind of structure that you and these congressmen are going to work out. But I don't hear any conversation about DACA students, Professor, and that frustrates me enormously. So I'm willing to do all sorts of Herculean things in order to protect these young men and women and kids that are DACA students. Um, I'm willing to build a big wall and waste a ton of money on it just to give them some legal path to citizenship, or even just permanent legal status if I can't get them citizenship. I prefer citizenship if that's what they desire. And we're not talking about that. Is that in this immigration bill?
I don't know.
No,
I
it's not. We're just punting on it. We're just skipping it. So we're allowing.
Well, but I remember the original punt too, which was incredibly frustrating because if you will recall way back when DACA first came up,
Yeah.
that you had both, well, I'll blame the Democrats first, uh,
Okay.
because there was a bill that could have passed that would have legalized the status of all DACA kids.
This
And
was under President Obama.
yeah,
Okay.
and it was the Democrats who rejected it because they wanted it as an issue to run on.
Because it would appeal to people like me, make me
And they
mad at the
would,
Republic.
yeah, and they killed the bill,
Okay.
killed it over and over again. And yeah, you want to talk about people being used as political pawns. Um,
Okay. So first you're mad at Democrats. Now you're in the what's how are you mad at Republicans?
well, Republicans didn't fix it when they had a chance.
Okay.
you know, when Trump first came into office, there was a magical window, you know, when they could have passed that original bill, which was a clean DACA bill, gotten kind of everything they wanted, and then they didn't
Was
do it.
that the Gang of Eight, the Senate bill?
Pardon?
Was that the Gang of Eight, that compromise bill, that bipartisan compromise bill?
No. But
Hmm.
they never reintroduced the original two. I want to say it was from 2000. I'd have to go back and check, but I want to say it was from 06, 07. No, it was no. It would have been what was Obama? It would have been like the second and third year of Obama's second term,
Okay.
was when it was
Well,
originally introduced. Yeah.
do you agree
But they
though,
didn't reintroduce it in 17 when they could have.
do you agree out of principle that it's absurd and immoral to allow these young men and women who
Yeah, I was
are
thinking about,
like,
this again, it always comes back to Calvin Coolidge, but what he says, men don't write laws, they discover them. When you know that something is morally wrong, and somehow this thing that is morally wrong is codified in the law, you have discovered something that needs to be fixed.
well, but no one's talking about this need to be fixed right now, and that is enormously frustrating to me.
Yeah.
That there's a chance for a massive, major immigration bill that
It also
doesn't
kind of
codify.
traps them in California, because California has so many um, legal ways of dealing with it, so that you can do everything you need to do in California, but nowhere else.
Mm.
So you can essentially live as a citizen in California, but nowhere else in the United States.
Interesting. Now you
Right?
can't vote though.
What's that?
Can't vote though.
No, they can't vote. Yeah, but
But pretty.
basically everything. Yeah,
I
everything
got.
is voting. Yeah.
But back to your original point, though, I think that's essential too. They should be full citizens.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's again, they're second class citizens. They can do everything that a citizen can do, but they can't vote. Like, they
Okay. Well, I know you have to leave. Last call, Stephen. Yay, nay, you okay? You okay? All
yeah.
right.
All right.
Professor, last call. Do you have any comments? And I know this was just
No,
a
and
almost
I just, I
question.
guess I always feel like I should apologize for my ignorance, because I don't have any answers. You
Well,
know,
but
uh,
your answers were all in that first show. Why don't you listen to yourself from May 28th of 2021 on
yeah.
Spotify? And I just think we need more people talking about it in a way that's not just deport everybody or put alligators on the, and somebody talking about DACA, and I don't hear enough of it. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation.
Well, I know that it's bad to legislate from anecdote, but I just think about this one student I had years ago, and I'll try and obscure some details, but like, she had no idea that she wasn't a U.S. citizen until she was assaulted.
Ugh.
And the idea that after you are sexually assaulted in high school, that what happens is your mom gets deported. I think you're right. This is not good.
Yeah, it's got to be fixed.
Right.
It's immoral.
Yes,
Uh,
it is.
okay, well, there's two of us out of 330 million people, so maybe we can add a third with Stephen. Maybe there's three of us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're gonna
So,
fix
okay. All right, Professor, thanks for your time. I know you got to go, so we're going to cut
it.
it short. Stephen, thanks for joining us. We do this most Fridays, so I'll try to invite you more often so you can log on when you want to. Thank you kindly. Have a great day, y'all.
You too. Bye.